The first sound was not the explosion. It was the hum, a strange, low resonance that rippled through the steel hull like a living thing. Then came the shudder. Metal groaned, lamps swung, and somewhere in the darkness, a mug shattered against the floor. Captain Lieutenant Otto Weiss steadied himself on the periscope column, his knuckles white. Around him, 44 men froze, their breath suspended. No one dared to speak. Above them, the sea roared with something that was not thunder. 2 weeks earlier, U-557 had left its pen in St. Nazaire under a sky thick with gulls and coal smoke. The crew had stood on deck, faces turned toward the Atlantic wind, proud and eager. They called themselves Die Geisterflotte, the Ghost Fleet. For years, they had haunted the convoy lanes, slipping unseen beneath Allied ships, their torpedoes striking like sudden, vengeful gods. They were legends in the German Navy. And they believed in their invisibility. Inside the narrow hull, the air was dense with oil, sweat, and the faint tang of iron. Engines growled like caged beasts in the aft compartment. Men moved through the cramped corridors in rehearsed rhythm, ducking pipes, clutching mugs of weak coffee, and muttering through exhaustion. Every space was claimed, every breath accounted for. Privacy did not exist here, only purpose did. Otto Weiss sat at his small metal desk, reviewing the coded transmission that had arrived the previous night. He was in his mid-30s, with sunken eyes and the gaunt look of a man whose face had forgotten daylight. His hair had turned prematurely gray along the temples, and his hands, though steady, trembled when he was alone. He traced the message again with his eyes. Convoy sighted northeast of Iceland. Intercept. Destroy. Return undetected. He read it 3 times, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something human. They never did. A soft knock came at the door. It was Karl Brenner, his first officer, tall, broad-shouldered, and just shy of 25. He carried his youth like a weapon. "New orders, Herr Captain?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Weiss nodded. "We intercept near Iceland. They want results." Karl grinned. "Then they'll have fireworks." Weiss looked up, tired. "You think this is a festival?" The younger man's grin faltered. "No, sir. But it's been weeks since we've fired a shot. The men need to remember what they're good at." Weiss studied him in silence, the eagerness, the arrogance, the fire that only the unscarred possess. Once, he'd had that same fire. Before the sound of dying men had replaced the music in his dreams. He folded the message and slipped it into his logbook. "Tell the crew to prepare for silent running by dusk. And remind them, this sea doesn't forgive mistakes." Karl saluted crisply. "Jol." As the officer left, Weiss allowed himself a brief moment of stillness. The U-boat creaked as if sighing. Somewhere forward, someone laughed, a short, nervous burst quickly swallowed by the hum of machinery. He could picture them all, Schmidt, the radio man, forever polishing his headphones as if clarity could save him, Engel, the cook, humming a lullaby from Hamburg as he stirred canned stew, Muller, the machinist, whose hands never stopped moving even in his sleep. They were boys pretending to be ghosts, and Weiss was their shepherd into the deep. By nightfall, U-557 surfaced under a blanket of fog. The horizon stretched endless and gray, the moon a pale smudge in the sky. Weiss climbed to the bridge, coat flapping in the wind. The air was brutally cold, clean, almost medicinal after the fetid air below. He lifted his binoculars, scanning the black waves. Nothing. Just emptiness and the whisper of diesel engines. Karl joined him. "It feels like the world ends out here," he said, half smiling. "It does," Weiss murmured. "For someone, it always does." They shared the silence that followed, the kind that lives between comrades who know words are useless. Then came the voice from below. "Contact on hydrophone. Bearing 080. Distant propellers." Multiple signatures. Weiss's pulse sharpened. Convoy? Could be, sir. At least 6, maybe more. He turned to Carl. Then let's hunt. What followed was routine, terrifyingly so. Orders passed like sparks. Men moved with quiet precision. Torpedoes were armed, engines throttled down. Every light dimmed to red. The boat slipped beneath the surface, becoming part of the blackness it served. Through the periscope, Weiss watched the faint silhouettes emerge, merchant ships in staggered lines, their lights barely visible through the mist. He counted them, 1, 2, 3, 8 in total, with a destroyer prowling their flank. His heartbeat matched the slow tick of the scope. Torpedoes 1 and 2, ready, came the whisper. Weiss nodded. Angle 5 degrees port. Fire 1. The hiss of compressed air filled the control room. Seconds later, tum. A bloom of orange fire lit the night above. Then another. The sea convulsed as the first ship split open, its cargo igniting in a blinding arc. The men cheered softly, fists pumping in silence. For a brief, shining instant, Weiss allowed himself to feel the old thrill, the mastery of the unseen, the power of the deep. They were still hunters. Still ghosts. Then the sound came. It began faintly, like the ticking of a distant clock. A rhythm too precise to be natural. Ping, ping, ping. Each note struck the hull with surgical clarity. "What's that?" whispered Carl. Weiss froze. He knew that sound. Every commander had heard rumors, a new allied weapon that could hear submarines. A sound like this meant only one thing: the sea was listening back. The pings grew louder. The crew exchanged looks. Schmidt turned pale at his station. "It's sweeping across us," he murmured. "Like it knows exactly where we are." "Depth 30 meters, Weiss ordered, his voice calm but cold. Silent running. No engines. The motors stopped. The world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. Men stood motionless, eyes wide, as if movement itself might draw death. The pings continued. Ping, ping, ping. Somewhere above, propellers churned the water. The destroyer was circling. The first depth charge exploded moments later, a booming roar that shook the walls and sent dust raining from the ceiling. Another followed, closer. Then another. Steel shrieked as the pressure wave hit. Pipes rattled. A bulb burst overhead, plunging the room into semi-darkness. Engel crossed himself. Muller muttered a prayer through clenched teeth. Carl clutched a handrail, shouting above the noise. "How do they know where we are?" Weiss didn't answer. He couldn't. He stared at the sonar officer, who whispered the words that would haunt him. "They can hear us, Herr Captain." The English, "They can hear us now." For 5 endless minutes, the world was nothing but thunder and darkness. Each explosion felt like the sky collapsing into the sea. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Silence. Weiss exhaled slowly, his ears ringing. He scanned the faces around him, sweat-soaked, wide-eyed, trembling. Boys no longer. The illusion had cracked. "Status?" he asked quietly. "Minor damage, sir. Battery 2 leaking slightly. Nothing critical." He nodded. "Surface when clear. Maintain radio silence." The boat ascended slowly, groaning like an old man rising from a chair. When they broke through the surface, the night was eerily still. Smoke lingered on the horizon from the burning convoy. The destroyer was gone, chasing ghosts of its own. Weiss climbed once more to the bridge. The air bit his face, sharp and metallic. Behind him, Carl emerged, face flushed with adrenaline. "They didn't get us," Carl said, almost laughing. "You see, sir? We're still invisible." Weiss didn't reply. He stared out at the horizon where the flames flickered like dying stars. The ping still echoed faintly in his head, long after they had stopped. He finally spoke, voice low. "No, Carl. Not anymore." Below deck, the crew went about repairs with mechanical silence. The camaraderie of the morning was gone, replaced by something colder, awareness. Every clank of a wrench sounded like a death knell. Every whisper carried the weight of disbelief. Schmidt approached Weiss with a hesitant look. "Sir, about that sound. Should we report it to command?" Weiss hesitated. To admit it would mean acknowledging that the age of the U-boat, their myth, their invincibility, was ending. But to remain silent was worse. He nodded slowly. "Prepare a coded message. Just the facts. No speculation." Schmidt saluted and left. Weiss sank into the captain's chair, the leather worn smooth from years of use. He closed his eyes. The echoes wouldn't stop. He remembered his first patrol, years ago, the exhilaration of slipping unseen beneath enemy ships, the cheers when the torpedo struck home. Back then, they had called it glory. But glory had a price, and the ocean always collected. The intercom crackled softly. "Captain, stew's on, if you'd like something warm," Engel said, his voice trembling just enough to betray fear. Weiss almost smiled. "Thank you, Engel. I'll be down shortly." He lingered a moment longer on deck, staring into the empty sea. Somewhere beyond the fog, the enemy was listening. Somewhere above, the world still believed the U-boats were unstoppable. But down here, in the cold belly of the Atlantic, Weiss understood what no one on land yet did: the hunters of yesterday were becoming the hunted of tomorrow. A distant rumble broke the silence, thunder, or something like it. The crew below stirred, glancing upward. Weiss didn't move. The sky was darkening, the waves beginning to rise. He took one last look at the flames dying on the horizon, then turned to the hatch. "All hands below. Prepare for dive." The siren wailed softly, echoing through the narrow corridors. Men moved quickly, sealing hatches, checking gauges. The engines hummed to life once more, the sound both comforting and terrifying. As U-557 slipped beneath the waves again, the sea closed over them with a whisper. The surface became smooth, unbroken, as if they had never existed at all. Deep in the control room, Weiss stood by the periscope, his reflection caught in the dim red light. He looked older than he had that morning. His eyes, once sharp and sure, now carried the weight of realization. He spoke quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "We've woken the ocean, gentlemen. And it's listening." The men said nothing. Only the rhythmic thrum of machinery answered him. Outside, the Atlantic stretched infinite and indifferent. In its depths, the ghosts of sunken ships drifted silently, their steel bones echoing with memory. Somewhere among them, U-557 glided forward into darkness, not as a hunter, but as something far more fragile. The pings had stopped for now. But in Weiss's mind, they never would. And somewhere, deep beneath the calm surface, the ocean waited, listening still. The pings returned before dawn. Soft at first, like distant raindrops, then stronger, sharper, deliberate. Each one seemed to cut through the steel hull and into the bones of the men inside. In the dim red glow of the control room, no one breathed louder than the sea aloud. Otto Weiss stood near the periscope, hands clasped behind his back, every nerve attuned to the rhythm that hunted them. They had been submerged for 16 hours. The air had gone stale, thick with sweat and diesel fumes. Condensation dripped from the ceiling in slow, rhythmic beads. The crew spoke little now, words had become dangerous, wasteful. Every sound was a potential death sentence. Karl Brenner crouched near the sonar console, eyes locked on the oscillating needle that danced to the enemy's pulse. His jaw was clenched so tightly it trembled. "They've found us again," he whispered. "Different bearing. They're not guessing anymore." Weiss didn't answer. He had no words left for denial. The old rules, the silence, the patience, the faith in invisibility, no longer applied. The enemy's sonar could see what the ocean once hid. "Depth?" Weiss asked finally. 80 meters, replied Muller, his voice hoarse. Weiss nodded. "Take her down to 120. Slowly. No sudden movement." The valves hissed softly. The U-boat descended, the hull groaning as pressure mounted. A drop of water trickled from a seam in the overhead pipe. It splashed onto the floor, a small sound that made half the crew flinch. Carl turned to Weiss. "If we keep diving, we'll crush ourselves before they hit us." Weiss's gaze didn't shift. Better crushed than cornered. Another ping echoed through the hull, louder this time, closer. The destroyer was triangulating their position. The men exchanged nervous glances, faces drawn and pale. Someone muttered a prayer in the aft compartment. Another whispered a curse at God. Then came the first explosion. The boat lurched violently as the shock waves slammed through the water. Bulbs shattered. The control room plunged into a deeper red. Tools clattered to the floor. Weiss steadied himself against the chart table, heart hammering. "Damage," he barked. "Minor flooding in the forward compartment," Muller shouted back. "Holding for now." A second blast followed, then a third, each one closer, each one reshaping the world into chaos and noise. The sound was a physical thing, pressing against the eardrums, crushing thought. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes. The men's faces twisted in terror and disbelief. Carl grabbed Weiss by the shoulder. "We have to fight back. Load the aft tubes, we can." Weiss spun on him, voice sharp as steel. "And fire at what, Carl? The ocean? You'll only tell them where to aim next." The younger man's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes burned with frustration. He turned away, fists trembling. The bombardment continued for what felt like hours. Each charge sent the boat rocking, groaning, creaking in protest. The temperature inside rose, the air was rank and wet. Men coughed into their sleeves, too afraid to make noise. When it finally stopped, silence fell like a blanket. The only sound was the slow drip of water and the faint hum of the battery vents. Weiss exhaled, his throat dry. "Hold depth," he ordered. "Engines off. We stay still." The men obeyed. The engines died, leaving the crew alone with their thoughts and the oppressive pressure of the deep. Minutes crawled into hours. The air grew thinner. Breath came shallow and labored. Sweat clung to every surface. Someone gagged quietly in the darkness. Weiss sat on a small bench near the command post, head bowed. He could feel the men's eyes on him, searching for strength he wasn't sure he still had. The weight of command was heavier now than the water pressing against the hull. He thought of the last letter he had written to his wife, weeks ago. "The sea is quiet this time of year." Almost kind. A lie written in neat, tidy script. He wondered if she had believed it. Carl broke the silence. "They'll be waiting up there," he said quietly. "Circling. Like wolves." Weiss nodded. "Then we wait longer." "How long?" "As long as it takes." Carl laughed bitterly. "You think the air will wait too?" The words hung in the stale air. No one spoke after that. Hours later, a faint groan echoed through the hull, the sound of shifting metal under impossible pressure. A single rivet popped near the engine room, releasing a hiss of seawater that spattered onto the floor. Men scrambled to patch it with cloth and resin, hands shaking. Weiss stood, steady despite the dizziness creeping into his vision. He pressed his palm to the cold steel wall. "Hold together," he whispered. It was unclear whether he spoke to the boat or to himself. Time lost meaning. Men began hallucinating, flashes of light that weren't there, voices whispering names in the hum of the machinery. Engel, the cook, swore he heard his mother's singing through the pipes. Schmidt claimed he saw faces reflected in the condensation. Weiss said nothing. He too had begun to hear things. At last, after what the clock said were 18 hours, Weiss gave the order to rise. Very slowly. No lights. The motors hummed back to life, weak and hesitant. The U-boat ascended through the black water like a ghost clawing toward air. Every meter creaked louder. When they finally broke the surface, the men gasped as if waking from a nightmare. They opened the vents, flooding the compartments with clean, freezing oxygen. It burned their lungs but felt like salvation. Weiss climbed the ladder to the bridge. The sky was slate gray, empty but for distant clouds. The ocean stretched flat and indifferent. There was no sign of the destroyer. Carl joined him, shivering. "We made it," he said, voice cracking with relief. Weiss didn't answer. He stared at the horizon, eyes scanning the waves. "They're learning," he said softly. "Every hour, they learn faster." Carl followed his gaze. "Then we'll learn too." Weiss turned to him, something like pity in his eyes. "We're machines built for a war that's already changing. You can't outlearn extinction." Carl's jaw tightened. "You sound defeated." Weiss almost smiled. "No. Just realistic." Below deck, the crew began to move again, cleaning, repairing, pretending to forget. But the air of quiet dread lingered. Every man carried it differently. Schmidt avoided eye contact, staring instead at his trembling hands. Engel cooked without speaking, his eyes unfocused. Muller checked the depth gauges over and over, though they were already steady. Carl walked through the narrow passage, his voice low but firm. "You did well, boys. We're alive. That's what matters." No one replied. The silence told him what he already knew: survival was no longer victory. It was just delay. Later, Weiss sat at his desk, the low hum of the engines vibrating beneath his chair. He opened his logbook and began to write. Engaged Allied convoy. Sustained prolonged depth charge attack. New detection method confirmed. Enemy capable of continuous tracking. Crew morale strained but operational. He hesitated before adding the last line, "We are being hunted." He stared at the words for a long time before closing the book. The intercom crackled. "Captain," Schmidt called, "I'm getting strange feedback on the receiver. Something pulsing, faint but steady." Weiss frowned. "Sonar? Could be. But it's different. A higher frequency." He went to the radio compartment. The sound came through the headphones, a thin, metallic rhythm, like heartbeat against metal. Ping, ping, ping. The same sound, but distant, distorted. Carl joined him. "It's the same destroyer?" Schmidt shook his head. "No. Another one. Closer." Weiss inhaled sharply. "They're relaying positions. Communicating through the water itself." Carl stared at him. "Then there's no escape, is there?" Weiss didn't respond. He returned to the control room and looked around at the faces of his men, exhausted, grim, hollowed out. "We go deeper," he said finally. "Below 150. Muller's eyes widened. "That's past safe depth, sir." Weiss's tone left no room for argument. "Then pray the ocean forgives us." The boat dove again. The hull screamed under the strain. Rivets popped like gunfire. A pipe burst in the galley, spraying scalding steam. Men scrambled to contain it. The pings grew fainter, then vanished altogether. For the first time in a day, there was quiet. Weiss closed his eyes. Stop engines. The silence that followed was absolute. No hum, no vibration, only the distant moan of the sea pressing down. They drifted like a corpse on the ocean floor, lifeless and invisible. Hours passed. The temperature dropped. Condensation froze on the metal surfaces. Men shivered in their damp uniforms. Someone began humming softly, a lullaby that wavered and died in the still air. Karl approached Weiss. His face was pale, eyes rimmed red. They'll give up soon. They have to. Weiss shook his head. They don't need to find us now. They only need to make us afraid to move. Karl exhaled, frustrated. Then what are we waiting for? Weiss looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not arrogance anymore, but confusion, fatigue, a flicker of fear he hadn't shown before. For nightfall, Weiss said simply. When even the ocean sleeps. When the sonar pings finally ceased completely, the crew dared to hope. Weiss allowed the engines to start again, barely above a whisper. The boat rose slowly through blackness, each meter feeling like rebirth. When they surfaced, the night was clear. The stars looked cruelly bright. The waves glimmered silver in their reflection. Karl stepped onto the bridge, inhaling deeply. It's beautiful, he said quietly. Weiss nodded. The sea always is. Especially when it wants you to forget what it hides. They drifted there for a long while, the engines silent, the stars watching. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. Or perhaps it was something else, something mechanical, patient, waiting. Weiss turned away from the horizon. We'll head south by morning, he said. Maybe we'll find quiet waters again. Karl hesitated. And if there aren't any left? Weiss met his eyes. Then we learn to live without quiet. He descended the hatch, leaving Karl alone on the bridge. The younger officer watched the dark water swirl below, every ripple whispering of unseen depths. He couldn't shake the feeling that the sea was listening, remembering their names. Below, Weiss returned to his cabin. He took out the logbook again, flipping to the last page. He drew a small line under the day's entry and wrote 3 words. The silence lies. He stared at them until the letters blurred. Above, the sky cracked with distant lightning. The sea rolled slowly, endlessly. And in the deep, where light could not reach, something metallic pulsed faintly, listening, always listening. The engines restarted with a sound that reminded Otto Weiss of a wounded animal, uneven, desperate, straining against the dark weight of the sea. For a moment, he thought the boat itself might shatter from exhaustion. Then the hum steadied, low and continuous, echoing down the narrow corridors like a heartbeat reluctantly returning to life. They had survived the last attack, but something invisible had shifted. The men spoke less now, even among themselves. The air carried a strange tension, as though the sea around them had changed from element to presence. Weiss felt it too, the sensation of being watched, not by ships, but by the deep itself. The batteries were nearly depleted. They had to surface to recharge, though the thought filled every man with dread. Weiss ordered the ascent at midnight, when the Atlantic was wrapped in fog. The U-boat broke through the surface with a hiss of air and a groan of metal. The hatch opened to reveal a sky swollen with clouds, the moon a faint smear behind them. Weiss climbed the ladder, his gloved hands slick with condensation. The night wind struck his face like ice. He inhaled deeply, clean air, real air, and looked out over the rolling Black Sea. It was too still. The fog clung low and heavy, muting sound and distance. Radar sweep clear, Karl Brenner reported from the bridge, his voice low. No contacts. Weiss nodded, though his gut twisted with unease. Run the diesels for 20 minutes only. Then we dive again. Karl hesitated. We won't have full charge. I said 20 minutes, Weiss repeated. The younger man didn't argue. Below deck, the engines roared to life, the vibration rattling every bolt and rib of the vessel. The sound was comforting, almost human, but it carried risk. Sound was betrayal now. Weiss kept his eyes on the horizon, the binoculars fogging with his breath. Nothing moved. The ocean stretched in every direction, vast, black, and deceptively calm. Then, faintly, he heard it. A new sound. Not mechanical, not natural. It rose and fell in irregular pulses, like a distorted echo of their own engines. He lowered the binoculars. "Do you hear that?" Carl cocked his head. "Just the engines, sir." "No," Weiss said, sharper. "Listen." They stood in silence. The sound came again, a soft, rhythmic thrum that seemed to come from below. Carl frowned. "Could be a whale." Weiss shook his head. "That's not alive." The fog thickened. The sound grew clearer, repeating in intervals. Weiss felt it more than heard it, vibrations underfoot, through the deck, through the hull. A message in the water. He climbed down to the control room. Schmidt patched the hydrophones through the speakers. The young radioman adjusted his dials, his hands trembling slightly. Static hissed, then faded. The sound filled the room, a metallic pulse, steady, deliberate. Weiss listened, his skin prickling. "It's sonar," he said quietly. "But not theirs. Not like before." Carl leaned close. "Another U-boat?" Schmidt looked up, eyes wide. "No German signature, sir." "And it's repeating." The sound looped, a series of 5 pings, then silence, then the same 5 again. Almost musical. Engel, the cook, muttered, "Maybe it's them. The ones who didn't make it." Someone hissed at him to shut up, but the words hung in the air like oil. Weiss didn't move. "Record it," he ordered. "And kill the diesels." The engines died. Silence returned, thick, suffocating. The men strained their ears for more, but the sound faded into nothingness. Only the creak of metal remained. Later, in his small cabin, Weiss replayed the recording through a headset. The rhythm was unmistakable, almost purposeful. It wasn't random noise. Someone, or something, was signaling. But who? And why? He pressed the headphones tighter to his ears, eyes closed. Between the pings, he thought he heard something else. A faint whisper, distorted and distant, like a voice carried through water. He replayed it again, until he realized it wasn't there at all. His mind had supplied it. He removed the headset and rubbed his face. The exhaustion was burrowing into him, deeper than fatigue. He wondered how many days it had been since he'd slept properly. Carl entered quietly, ducking under the low frame. "The men are asking questions," he said. "They think we're being followed." "They're not wrong." Carl hesitated. "You think the British are copying our signals?" "Maybe," Weiss said. "Or maybe they're hearing things like we are." Carl frowned. "You mean, imagining?" Weiss didn't answer. Carl lingered a moment longer. "We can't keep running like this, Otto. The crew's cracking. Engel barely speaks. Muller's hands shake so badly he can't hold a wrench. They need rest, or at least something to believe in." Weiss stared at the logbook on his desk. "They need the truth." Carl exhaled sharply. "Then tell them something that won't make them lose what's left of their minds." When Carl left, Weiss sat motionless for a long while, listening to the faint groans of the hull. The sea was calm, but inside the boat, tension vibrated like a live wire. By morning, they were on the move again, creeping southward through deep water. The men worked mechanically, eyes hollow. Each carried the memory of that strange signal. Some called it an echo. Others called it a warning. Schmidt approached Weiss during the noon watch. "Herr Captain," he whispered, glancing around, "I've been listening again. That sound, it came back last night. Same pattern." Weiss's pulse quickened. "How far?" "Hard to say. But closer." Weiss followed him to the radio compartment. The recording played, a ghostly rhythm through the static. It seemed to echo their own course, as if shadowing them. Karl appeared behind them, grim-faced. "It's following us," he said. "Or leading us," Weiss murmured. Karl's temper flared. "Enough of this riddling. Either we're being hunted or we're chasing ghosts." Weiss turned sharply. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't feel it every time the hull shakes?" Their eyes locked. For a moment, command and rebellion hung between them. Then Karl looked away. "We need a plan," he said quietly. Weiss's voice softened. "We surface tonight. We'll send a message to command. If this is new Allied sonar, they must know." That night, the sea was eerily calm. Stars reflected off the waves like shards of glass. The crew moved with quiet discipline, aware of how exposed they were. Weiss climbed to the bridge, scanning the horizon. No ships. No light. Only endless black water. "Transmit," he said. Schmidt sent the coded burst, "Enemy using new sonar. Possible unknown frequencies. Following us." The message vanished into the static of the ether. Weiss knew it might never reach anyone. As the transmission ended, a faint glow appeared on the horizon, distant, moving. Weiss stiffened. "Down," he shouted. They dove again, fast and blind. The hull shuddered as the sea swallowed them. The engines cut. The lights dimmed. Moments later, the sonar began again. Louder. Closer. "Ping, ping, ping. Bearing 270, Schmidt whispered. "They're right above us." A depth charge exploded somewhere aft. The blast hurled Karl against a bulkhead. He grunted, blood streaking his cheek. "Hold depth." Weiss shouted. No noise. Another explosion. Metal screamed. A pipe burst, spraying steam. The lights flickered wildly. Then, through the chaos, a strange sound cut through the water, different from the pings. It was higher, faster, almost melodic. The crew froze. "It's the same pattern," Schmidt gasped. "The one from before." Weiss's mind raced. "Play it back." The sound echoed through the control room, filling it with that eerie, rhythmic pulse. Between the bursts of sonar, the frequency hummed like a hidden code. Karl's eyes widened. "It's answering them." The realization settled like ice. Whatever was sending that signal, it wasn't Allied. It wasn't theirs either. It was deeper. Older. The bombardment stopped suddenly. Silence pressed in. The men waited, breaths shallow. Then, faintly, through the hull came another noise, a hollow, metallic groan, as if something massive shifted in the depths below them. Muller whispered, "God help us." Weiss stared at the depth gauge. "Down 20 meters, he ordered. Karl turned to him, incredulous. "You want to go toward it?" "We can't go up," Weiss said calmly. "The destroyer's waiting. Whatever's below, might be our shadow." The descent was slow and torturous. The water darkened to ink. The pressure crept higher. At 180 meters, they saw it. Through the periscope's dim lens, a shape loomed in the dark, a silhouette too vast to comprehend, unmoving, half-buried in silt. It might have been another submarine, or a wreck, or something else entirely. The sonar pulse came again, and the shape seemed to answer. Weiss stepped back, his voice barely audible. "We're not the first to be hunted." Carl stared, mouth dry. What is it? A grave, Weiss said. They rose again, slowly, cautiously, until the darkness thinned. The sonar pings faded. The water grew still. But the silence that followed felt heavier than before. No one spoke for hours. Even after they surfaced, the men worked in silence, moving like ghosts in the half-light. Carl approached Weiss on the bridge. His voice was rough. What did we see down there? Weiss didn't answer immediately. His eyes were on the horizon, where dawn was bleeding through the clouds. Proof, he said at last. That the sea remembers everything it takes. Carl's jaw tightened. And what do we tell the crew? Weiss looked down into the dark hatch. Tell them nothing. Let them believe we're still the hunters. He descended back into the boat, the air thick with oil and silence. The engines murmured to life, and the U-boat slipped once more beneath the surface. As they vanished into the deep, Weiss sat alone at his desk and began to write in the logbook, heard unknown sonar signature. Not allied. Possibly natural, though patterned. Crew unsettled. I am unsettled. He paused, the pen trembling. Then he added one more line, voices in the deep, no longer imagination. He closed the book and listened. Somewhere beyond the steel and darkness, a faint pulse echoed once more, steady, patient, knowing. Weiss leaned back, eyes closed. The sound grew softer, blending with the rhythm of the sea, until he could no longer tell where the ocean ended and his own heartbeat began. The storm came without warning. One moment, the Atlantic was a vast gray mirror, the next, it was a churning wall of chaos. Waves rose like living mountains, smashing down on the hull with thunderous force. The U-boat groaned, twisting in protest. Every man aboard felt the storm not just above them, but inside them, echoing the turmoil that had been building for weeks. Captain Otto Weiss clung to the periscope column, his knuckles white, the air thick with diesel and fear. Keep her steady, he shouted over the roar. His voice was hoarse, but it cut through the noise like a command carved in stone. Steady's gone, sir. Muller yelled from the controls. She's fighting us every meter. Karl Brenner gripped the navigation table to stay upright as the boat lurched violently. We have to surface or we'll be crushed like a tin can. Weiss's mind spun through the options, surface and face detection, or dive and be torn apart by pressure. Both meant death. Yet his instinct screamed to fight the sea rather than surrender to it. Surface, he said finally, the word like an exhale of defeat. The U-boat rose, gasping through the depths. When they broke the surface, the night exploded around them, wind howling, rain slicing through the air, waves colliding in mad fury. Weiss climbed to the bridge, rain hammering his face. Lightning split the sky, revealing a world of violent beauty, waves twisting like serpents, white foam glowing ghostly in the flashes. Carl joined him, shouting to be heard. We've lost the radio for long-range transmission. Antennas damaged. Weiss nodded, soaked to the bone. Then fix it. I don't care how. Below, Schmidt struggled with the equipment. Sparks spat from a severed wire as he tried to patch it. Too much saltwater in the lines, he cried. I can't hold signal for more than a few seconds. Weiss returned below deck, dripping, his coat heavy with seawater. The storm's fury outside was matched by the tension inside. The men's eyes were hollow, haunted. They were running on memory and instinct now. The sonar room pulsed with faint static. Through the chaos, a familiar sound bled into the speakers, soft, rhythmic, haunting. Ping, ping, ping. Carl froze. It's back. Weiss's voice was barely audible. So it found us again. Schmidt turned the dials, his face pale. No allied signature. It's the same pattern as before. A deep tremor passed through the boat, a vibration too low to be mechanical. The hull shuddered like a living thing. What was that? Muller whispered. Nobody answered. Outside, lightning flashed again, and in that brief moment of illumination, Weiss glimpsed something through the periscope. A dark shape in the water. Immense. Still. Not a ship, something older, more alien to human eyes. He lowered the scope slowly, his breath uneven. Carl saw his face and stepped closer. What did you see? Weiss didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. A graveyard. The U-boat rocked violently as another wave slammed its side. Schmidt struggled to stabilize the radio equipment. Signals open for 30 seconds, he yelled. Say it now, or we lose it. Weiss leaned over the console, his hand shaking as he keyed the mic. This is U-557. Unknown sonar contact. Not allied. Possible biological or unidentified mechanical source. Crew morale. The signal cut. A burst of static filled the air. Then came the voice. Faint. Distorted. Speaking in German. But it wasn't Schmidt. It wasn't any of them. U-557, maintain course. The voice was calm, almost soothing. We are coming to guide you home. Every man froze. Schmidt looked at the equipment, horrified. It's not transmitting, sir. It's receiving. Weiss grabbed the mic. Identify yourself. Silence. Then, the same voice, slightly warped. Do not fear the deep. It remembers you. The transmission ended. Weiss felt a chill crawl down his spine. He turned to Carl. Did command send that? Carl shook his head. No one could send that. Not from where we are. The storm raged harder. The U-boat pitched, water crashing through the vents. Alarms blared. Muller shouted, we're taking on water in Section 3. Weiss gave orders through the chaos, but part of his mind was elsewhere, on that voice, on the shape beneath the waves, on the strange pulse that had followed them since the channel. It wasn't madness anymore. It was real. Hours passed in fragments. They sealed the leak, barely holding depth. Exhaustion gripped every man like an anchor. In the dim glow of red emergency lights, faces looked spectral, hollow-eyed, caught between faith and despair. Carl sat across from Weiss in the narrow mess, clutching a tin mug of cold coffee. We're out of options, he said quietly. We're out of fuel, half our batteries are gone, and the storm's killing us faster than the enemy ever could. Weiss stared into the dark. We can't surface again. The destroyers will have our scent. Then what? Weiss looked at him, really looked. We go deeper. Carl laughed once, bitterly. You'll kill us. Maybe, Weiss said. Or maybe that's where the truth is. When they dove again, the descent felt endless. The hull moaned under the pressure, bolts whining. At 200 meters, Schmidt whispered that they'd exceed safe limits. Weiss said nothing. The sonar pulsed again, now so close it vibrated in their bones. Ping, ping, ping. Then came the voice again, clearer, softer. Otto Weiss, stop running. Carl's head snapped toward him. It said your name. Weiss's throat tightened. Play it again. Schmidt rewound the reel, but there was only static. No voice. The men exchanged glances, fear tightening like wire. Weiss rubbed his eyes. Maybe I'm hearing things. But he knew he wasn't. The voice had been unmistakable. Familiar. His wife's, from years ago, before the war. Before the sea had claimed everything. The U-boat drifted deeper into darkness. The air was thick, metallic. Every sound was amplified, the hiss of oxygen, the groan of rivets, the slow drip of condensation. Time lost meaning. Then, suddenly, the pressure gauges spiked. "Something's pulling us," Muller shouted. "Downward." Weiss grabbed the controls. Full reverse. The engines roared, straining, but it was no use. The boat lurched violently, tilting nose first. Loose tools clattered to the floor. Men shouted, clinging to whatever they could. "Depth, 250, 280, 300. Carl called out, panic seeping into his voice. Weiss barked orders that no one could follow. The U-boat was no longer a vessel, it was prey caught in invisible jaws. Then, just as suddenly, the pull stopped. The engine steadied. The depth gauge froze at 310 meters. Silence. No one moved. The only sound was their ragged breathing. Schmidt's voice cracked. "What was that?" Weiss didn't answer. He looked through the periscope again, though there was nothing to see at that depth. Nothing, except darkness that almost seemed to pulse with life. Then, faintly, the sonar began again. But this time, it wasn't an external source. It was coming from inside the boat. The sound echoed through the metal, soft, rhythmic, almost human. Carl stepped back. How is that possible? Schmidt's eyes were wide. It's the hull itself. It's answering. Weiss stared at the walls, at the sweating metal. He could feel the vibrations under his hand, like a heartbeat. The radio crackled again. This time, the voice was unmistakably his own. "We are the hunters. We are the hunted. We are the memory of the sea." The men froze, paralyzed by terror. Weiss dropped the mic, his breath quickening. "Shut it off." Schmidt yanked the power, plunging the room into silence. Only the hum of the dying batteries remained. Carl whispered, "Otto, what if that's what's left of them? The others who never returned?" Weiss said nothing. His thoughts were drifting somewhere deep and wordless, where fear met fascination. He finally spoke, his voice low. "Maybe they didn't die. Maybe they just went where we're going." Hours later, the storm above subsided. The ocean was calm again, eerily so. Weiss ordered them to rise slowly. The hull creaked as the U-boat ascended through the layers of water. At 100 meters, the sonar returned to normal. The strange pulse faded. The men began to breathe again, cautiously. Then the radio light blinked, once, twice. Schmidt hesitated. "Incoming transmission." Weiss leaned forward. "Put it through." A voice, crackling, distant, "U-557, this is command. Report your status. We lost your last transmission." "Over." The men looked at one another in disbelief. Carl almost laughed from relief. "It's real this time." Weiss reached for the mic. His hand trembled slightly. "This is U-557. We." The radio shrieked. The sound tore through the room like a blade. Lights flickered. Every instrument went dead. Then came the last message, whispered, familiar, final. "Do not return. The sea remembers." The lights went out completely. When dawn rose over the Atlantic, the storm had passed. The sea was glass smooth. In the stillness, no sign of U-557 remained, no oil slick, no debris, no trace of metal or men. Hours later, Allied patrols recorded a faint transmission echoing through the static, impossible to trace. Just a few words, repeated over and over, in a voice that sounded both mechanical and human. U-557, reporting, all quiet in the deep. Then silence, eternal and absolute. And somewhere far below the waves, among the ruins of forgotten machines, a faint sonar pulse began again. Slow. Patient. Endless.